All right, so you want to know what's up with Australian Catholic University and those international student enrollment caps, right? We've got some really interesting stuff to dig into here. We've got ACU reverses international student recruitment hold, and the official transcripts from the Australian Senate's Education and Employment Legislative Committee hearing.
Yeah, this ACU thing, it's like just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. I think a lot is happening in Australian higher education right now. We're going to break it all down. We'll lay out the timeline, the key players, and really try to understand, what it all means for international students and for the universities themselves.
Yeah.
It's
I'm hooked already. Especially ACU's, sudden back and forth on their enrollment. First, they were like, nope, no more international students for 2025. Then they're all, okay, applications are back open.
Yeah.
But not for everyone.
Right.
Nursing and some postgraduate health science programs are left out in the cold. What's going on with that?
Well, it seems like maybe they were trying to get ahead of things.
Yeah.
The Koala publication, they're suggesting that ACU got a little warning from the Department of Education. They were told, hey, you might be going over those caps. And this was even before the legislation passed. Yeah, it's like getting a parking ticket before the sign is even up.
Wow, that's some real behind-the-scenes stuff. But how do we know that even happened?
Well, it's based on, hints, little things that were said in these parliamentary records. So it's more of a, an educated guess than, a solid fact.
Right.
But still, it really makes you wonder how much, unofficial guidance universities were getting about these caps.
Yeah. For sure. And speaking of official, things got a little heated in the Senate inquiry.
Oh, yeah.
We've got these transcripts, and there's this exchange between Senator Faruqi and Mr. Rimmer from the Department of Education. It's pretty tense. Rimmer basically says, point blank, yeah, ACU was the university we put on notice for potentially over-enrolling. And then Senator Faruqi, she doesn't hold back. She's asking about a potential 53% cut to ACU's international student numbers.
53%.
Yeah, it's like a courtroom drama.
Oh, wow. So that 53% number, that really got people's attention. But if you look closer at what Rimmer said, he actually argues that, if you compare it to 2019 enrollment numbers, it tells a different story. He points to 12,273 international student commencements back then. And he suggests that ACU isn't actually facing that big of a cut.
Right.
So it's like, was Senator Faruqi maybe playing it up a bit, to make a point? Or is there something more to it?
Well, it does sound like Rimmer was saying that predicting these enrollment numbers is, it's not easy.
Right.
I mean, you've got visas, you've got students changing their minds.
Yeah.
All sorts of things that can throw off those projections.
Exactly. And he really stressed that ACU has options, to manage the risk, though he didn't really say what those options were. That's what I find interesting, right? What are these mysterious options that universities have? Could they be like, okay, we'll focus on these programs or maybe shift their marketing or even start partnerships with, overseas institutions? This is where students like you might really feel the impact.
So you're saying even if the overall numbers look okay, the types of programs open to international students, those could change.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about that before.
And there's another thing. The Koala, they estimated that this whole mess might have cost ACU, get this, tens of millions of dollars.
Wow.
So what does that mean for the university? If you were hoping to study something, maybe a less popular program at ACU, it might be on the chopping block now because of that financial hit.
Ouch. That's gotta hurt. It really makes you wonder what the ripple effects are going to be. Across all of Australian higher education, this ACU thing is just one example. What's the bigger picture here when it comes to international student policies in Australia?
Well, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
These caps are part of, I think, a bigger shift in how the government's looking at international education.
Right.
We're trying to find that balance. On the one hand, you've got these huge economic benefits that international students bring, but on the other hand, there's that worry about, becoming too reliant on that income.
Yeah, that makes sense. Australia's got this reputation, right, as a top spot for international students. But putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, that can be risky. What are the downsides? What are people worried about specifically?
So one thing is, what if universities start focusing more on international students and less on domestic ones? Could that limit opportunities for Australian students?
Right.
Another worry is, okay, what happens if that flow of international students suddenly dries up?
Yeah.
Universities, they could be in serious financial trouble. You can see cuts to programs, staff, even research.
So are these enrollment caps the best way to deal with those worries? It feels like there are pretty strong opinions on both sides.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated. Some people are saying, look, these caps are necessary, to keep things sustainable and balanced in higher education.
Mm,
They're saying if universities rely too much on international student fees, well, maybe they'll start ignoring other important sources of money,
like what?
like government funding or donations, that kind of thing.
Right.
But then on the other side, you've got people saying, hold on, wouldn't caps also limit choices for international students? Like people who want to study in Australia?
Yeah, that seems unfair, especially if someone's really got their heart set on a specific program.
Yeah, and student advocacy groups, they're really concerned about that. They're saying these caps, they're just creating unnecessary barriers
Mhm.
for talented people who want to come to Australia and contribute, to the economy, to society.
Mm.
And there's also that worry that caps could make the international student population less diverse. Well, universities might start prioritizing students from certain countries, the
Oh.
ones who pay higher fees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, right. So it's like one policy change can have this ripple effect. It touches everything.
Yeah.
What about the impact on Australia's economy as a whole? I mean, international education, that's a big industry here, isn't it?
Huge. Absolutely.
Right.
It's one of Australia's biggest exports, billions of dollars every year.
Wow.
And it supports thousands of jobs,
Yeah.
not just in education, but across different sectors.
So wouldn't these caps, like, potentially hurt the economy
Yeah.
if they're limiting how many international students can come and spend money here?
That's what some economists are saying.
Hmm.
They're warning that these caps might scare off potential students
Right.
who might decide, okay, I'll go to Canada or the UK. And that could hurt university revenues, sure.
Right.
But it also affects businesses, like places to live, restaurants, tourist stuff, all those places that rely on international students spending money.
Wow. So it's a tough situation. It sounds like the government's trying to do a lot of things at once: protect domestic students, keep the higher education system healthy in the long run, but also not hurt a major part of the economy.
Exactly. It's a balancing act. And there aren't any easy answers. You have to consider all these different viewpoints,
Mm.
and you have to be ready to adapt because the global landscape of higher ed, that's always changing.
Yeah. I can see why this whole ACU situation is getting so much attention. It really shows you what Australian universities are dealing with right now. It's kind of stressful, honestly.
Yeah.
So after diving into all of this, what are your thoughts?
Hmm.
Is this cap system fair?
That's tough to say.
Yeah.
What could the long-term consequences be for universities,
Mm-hmm.
for international students?
Right.
Well, one thing that really sticks out to me is like, what about program diversity?
Right.
What if universities have to prioritize certain programs just to stay under the cap? It could really limit choices for future international students. Imagine, you want to study something really specific,
Right.
but the universities had to cut back on those niche programs
Right.
to make room for the more popular ones.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's a big deal because, students like you're coming to Australia to follow your passions,
Right.
to be part of this diverse, vibrant academic community. And if you start restricting those opportunities, well, the impact goes way beyond just enrollment numbers.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's not just about how many students are coming here. It's about, like you said, who they are,
Exactly.
what they're bringing to the table.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot today. I bet our listeners are starting to understand how complicated all of this is. What are some of the key takeaways you want them to think about as they keep following this story?
It is a lot to think about, isn't it?
It really is. So for our listeners out there, what are some of the things they should keep in mind as they follow this ACU story and just the whole situation with international students in Australia?
Well, I think the first thing is, we can't forget this isn't just about numbers,
Right.
It's about people, their hopes and dreams, and the stuff they contribute to Australia, to the economy, to society. And the second thing is, well, this whole situation, it's changing all the time.
Yeah.
Policies change, universities change, higher education, globally, it's constantly in
Yeah.
flux. Staying informed, that's so important.
Absolutely. And how can people stay informed? What are some good resources you'd recommend?
There are some great publications out there that really dive deep into Australian higher education. The Koala, which we've talked about a bit today, they do fantastic investigative journalism.
Right.
Campus Morning Mail, they've got daily updates on what's happening in the sector.
Yeah.
And then if you want a global perspective, University World News is awesome.
Perfect. We'll be sure to include links to those in the show notes. Anything else listeners should keep an eye on?
I'd say don't just stop at the headlines,
Yeah,
like really dig in, look at the arguments on both sides.
right.
Think about everyone involved, the universities, the students, even those businesses that rely on international student spending.
Right.
Form your own opinion, an informed one about what you think is the best way forward for higher ed in Australia.
That's great advice. It's easy to get caught up in the emotions, but uh, taking a step back, looking at everything from different angles, that's really important.
It is. And remember, this whole ACU thing, it's just one part of a much bigger picture.
Right.
The decisions Australia makes about international education, those are going to have a lasting impact on universities, on students, on the whole country.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. This deep dive, it's been fascinating and a little bit, I don't know, worrying at times.
Yeah.
But that's what makes this topic so important, right? Yeah, for sure. It's been great unpacking all this with you.
You too, and to our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something new today and maybe understand this whole thing with international student enrollment caps in Australia a little bit better. Be sure to check out those resources we mentioned, and as always, keep those questions coming. Until next time.